If you enjoyed the channel and our video content and would like to support us, you can do this in a couple of ways. You can sign up to our Patreon site, which is a monthly subscription to one of our 4 tiers, each giving you something different from early access interviews up to exclusive unseen footage. There's also the option of a one-off donation via PayPal, which allows you the option to donate an amount of your choice. Both options really help to keep this channel going and to continue putting out regular content for you good folk. So please take a look at aircrewinterview.tv/donate, and I thank you in advance. Thank you and enjoy. So we are back with Nugs, who is a former Marine Hornet pilot, F-3 exchange pilot, and also F-5 and A4, which is why we're here today to talk. But Nugs, can you tell us what it was like going on to the F-5, coming from the F-3? Was there a big transition there for you?
Yeah, it really was, because when I flew the F-5, I had taken almost 3 years off of flying. When I came back from the F-3 exchange, I went to the Pentagon and served a year as the aide to the Commandant for Aviation, then went and took over the F-35 requirement job for the Marine Corps. So I did a lot of staff work during that time, and the only flying I did was I flew the F-35 simulator a little bit, but it was mainly just reading about aviation and longing to get back out there. So when I got command of the F-5 squadron, I had to go actually, because I hadn't flown in 3 years, I went back and flew the F-18 for about 6 months with the F-18 training squadron there in Miramar in San Diego, just to get refreshed and to feel good about flying again before I went and took over command of the F-5 squadron. The F-5, we don't really have a training unit. I guess you would call it the OCU. In the UK, we call it the Replacement Air Group, or the RAG in the Marine Corps. They don't have an F-5 RAG. Everything's done in-house. All the pilots that come to the F-5 are usually right off the line. Me and an F-18 pilot, and we had the token Harrier guy as well in the squadron. And so they would already be up to speed. So I hadn't flown in 3 years. The last plane I flew was the F-3, so I went and flew the F-18 to refresh before flying the F-5 again.
And coming obviously from the F-3 to the F-18, like on that 6 months deployment there, or training bit, what was it like? How did you see the differences from the RAF to the Marines? Was there similarities there?
Like I said in our last interview, the Royal Air Force, shockingly, was very, very much like the Marine Corps. Our training, our structured environment, the actual syllabus that I went through in the OCU of the F-3 was very similar to what I went through in the F-18. I got to add a little bit, saying I think I might have mentioned this before. The quality of the people I flew with in the RAF, i.e. the students, because I was a Marine major in there with, brand new guys right out of Valley. Their level of understanding and their ability was beyond what I was when I was at their time frame, and what the other guys I flew with in the RAG when I was a RAG student. So, the training, obviously, through primary and advanced training in the RAF is very top notch. So it was it started off a little faster with the RAF than it did with the Marine Corps. As far as once I got to the F-3, we started doing more advanced stuff a lot quicker than we did in the F-18 when I was a new F-18 student.
So let's talk about your time on the F-5. Obviously, you commanded the squadron, the snipers. How did you get that role or that job?
Well, in the Marine Corps, they have a command board that meets every year for all eligible commanders. And that's once you make 05 in the Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel, you're eligible for command. And based on your military occupational skill, mine being an F-18 pilot, there's more commands out there other than flying. There's all the F-18 squadrons. There's some ground command tours like even UAV squadrons, things like that are out there available for you. Some station jobs as well, station commander, things like that. So everybody wants a flying billet as a commanding officer, right? And it's also the luck. It's a lot of the luck of the draw, what's available, because every command, like my command with 401 was a 2-year command. So it took 2 years before it came up for my replacement, right? So if you're not in line or your timing's off, there might not be any flying commands even available for you on your command board. So it's luck of the draw. And I lucked out. I got the F-5 squadron. I always assumed I was a boat guy. I always had carrier experience. So once you get that booger on your finger in the Marine Corps, it's hard to shake it off, right? So, and I loved going to the boat. I always thought I'd go back to sea and just kind of assumed if I were going to get a command of a flying squadron, it would be going back to sea. When I first got the F-5 squadron, I've got to be honest with you, I was shocked. Number one is I was going to be in Yuma, Arizona, which is a little bit of an armpit in the United States, right? There's some nice things in Yuma, but man, is it hot in the summertime. You know, I'm talking real hot. And it's in the desert. And, you know, it's only a little over 2 hours away from San Diego, so it's really not that bad. You don't feel so isolated. But, you know, just it's not a desirable place to be stationed, right? Also, the F-5 didn't deploy overseas. And I like to deploy. I like to go places, and it wasn't going to deploy. So at first, I was like a little bit shocked. I'm not going to say disappointed. I was happy to have a flying command. But I was also like, well, I guess I'm not going to deploy now. You know, I'm going to be doing this. And it took me about 24 hours to soak all this in. Made a few phone calls to friends of mine, a buddy of mine who used to command that squadron years before I was ever there. I called him and talked to him personally, and he sold me on it. He was like, wow, this is one of the best deals in the Marine Corps as a pilot, because it's a squadron that falls under the reserve command. But yet you're an active duty commanding officer, and you have basically half of your pilots are active duty guys. And then you have other guys who are reservists to come in and fly, you know, 1 week a month and things like that. Your boss, who's an active duty colonel, is at a different base. So you're kind of, you're on the air station at Yuma, but you don't really answer to anybody at Yuma. You answer to another boss that's states away, back in Texas, actually. And not that that's, you know, a big deal, but it kind of lets you realize that, hey, you had command of this squadron. You were really in command. There wasn't somebody breathing down your neck every day and running your show for you or digging into your business as a commanding officer, which truly lets you be as a mature, you know, it lets you mature and understand leadership and you really take control of that squadron and do the best for them and the safety and the comfort and the, you know, prosperity of everybody there. And it really, you know, it's really a good deal. And for that, I can't be happier. It was the best tour I ever had, you know, because of that reason.
Wow. So just like backtracking a bit here. So to be a commander of an F-5 adversary squadron, did you have to have combat time, exchange time, or was it recommendation?
Well, to be the commanding officer, you have to obviously be an F-18 pilot, you know, with obviously you had a good record. You punched all your tickets moving up through the world. Whether I did an exchange tour or not didn't really matter, but that obviously helped, you know, because I generally, you know, maybe I just tell myself to make myself feel better, but I generally think that the Marine Corps isn't going to send a bunch of idiots over to represent them to the Brits, right? Even though I might be an idiot, I was able to hide that fact from the Royal Air Force once I got there. At least I think I did. But I don't know that really helped, but what did help is other tours I had done throughout my time. You know, I had multiple combat tours to Iraq, you know, and a lot of carrier time and deployments, a lot of deployed time. I'd done a tour with the infantry as a forward air controller. I'd done a high-level staff position. I was an aide to the Commandant for Aviation, which is a 3-star, the head of Marine Aviation. So I had done everything that I could possibly do, and then it was just to let the cards fall. Everybody wants a shot at being a commanding officer, and you just got, you know, when your time comes, you're either going to do it or not. It's not always because of what you've done in the past, more of luck of the draw and timing, and it just worked out for me. So that's kind of how that worked out. But as far as qualifications, all the pilots in 401 were at a minimum air combat tactics instructors, which is a certification you get in the Marine Corps. And it's basically, you know, you're able to fly with brand new guys and teach and stuff like that. Probably not all of them, but quite a few of my pilots were weapons school grads as well, Top Gun guys. but all of them were ACTIs, or combat tactics instructors. We had one Harrier guy. He was a combat tactics instructor in the Harrier community. He was a very talented guy as well. I had an F-15 pilot on exchange from the Air Force. Yeah, there was always an F-15 guy. Weezer Corrigan, he went on to command an F-15 squadron in Kadena out in Japan, and very talented. I hate to say it, he was probably one of my best pilots in the squadron. You know, and he was very junior too. He was a very young F-15 guy, but he was very, very talented. And he really grasped, and he loved being with the Marine Corps. You know, he cut his hair pretty short, you know, and he really embraced it. And we really, really appreciated Weezer Corrigan.
So, Nugs, what was it like going back into the F-5, and what was your training like, ground training and flying training?
Well, like I said, I refreshed in the F-18, which I did a basic syllabus with our OCU, or our RAG. Did some basic radar stuff, 1v1, you know, just getting familiar flying again. And then when I went to fly the F-5, we had one two-seater in the squadron. And there are a couple of guys in the squadron that are designated as instructors. And I just went up with them. They sat in the back. I got in the front, you know, did a day or so of ground school. The F-5 is a very simple airplane to start up and all that stuff. You know, there's not a lot of technical things to it like that. It's just the handling characteristics. And any skilled pilot who's been flying, you know, fixed wing, fast jets for a while can figure that out. So went up, and I can't remember exactly, but I want to say maybe 5 or 6 sorties with somebody in the back, and then you're off on your own. And, you know, you kind of, at first, they have kid gloves, you know, you fly as a wingman and kind of get used to the way the F-5 flies and stuff like that. And then once you feel more comfortable with the procedures, because we flew the F-5 differently, you know, because our radar wasn't that good. It was just a pulse radar. Yeah. We had ground controllers, basically laser GCI that would, you know, act as our some of our eyes and ears out there. And so we worked with them a lot. And so you had to get used to doing that. And then you move up to flight lead and 2-ship, 4-ship, stuff like that. Normal syllabus, but it maybe took 6 weeks from the time you first got in the airplane to the time you were fully qualified for everything.
Quite quick then.
Yeah, very quick, very quick. And the good thing about it, which I mentioned, I think the last time we spoke, Mike, is the F-5 never broke. You know, so you could always count on it. Every time I went flying, like I said, my whole command tour, I personally, there were flights that got canceled for maintenance, but I personally, only lost 2 aircraft, two maintenance, or two sorties to maintenance in 2 years of flying it, you know, which is incredible. You know, that happens weekly in a F-18 or probably an F-3 squadron, you know, so
absolutely,
it's nice. So things got done.
Yeah, absolutely. So how many girls and guys were on the Sniper Squadron? Because I'm guessing it's a pretty tight unit.
Well, we generally carried around 20 pilots. And like I said, about at any one time, there would be daily, we'd fly Monday through Friday, sometimes weekends. Daily, there would be 15 pilots, 14 to 15 around. Because like I said earlier, at that time, I don't know how they're doing it now, but at that time, about half the squadron were full-timers, so they were there every day. And then the other half would come in for their reserve duty, and they would rotate them in. They would sign up for what week they were going to be there, what days they were going to be there, things like that. And we had a couple of reserve guys that actually lived there in Yuma. So they were airline pilots, and then on their days off, they would just come in and fly with us. They really had a good deal. And they must have been raking in a lot of money too, but they would come in. And they were always trustworthy to be there. So like I said, every day we had at least, I want to say 14 pilots is what we needed to do, because we flew a pretty aggressive schedule. You know, right. I would generally fly twice a day, every day that I was there, you know, sometimes 3, you know, so it would work out, you know.
So before we got into the flying, I want to know, like, you mentioned before the F-15 guy coming on. What was that like, an Air Force guy coming on to a Marine squadron? What was that like?
You know, it's hard to say the reality of the situation, because Weezer, when he showed up, he was very junior. He had done a short time as an Eagle driver. I don't even know if he had 500 hours in the F-15, and then they had shut his squadron down because they were kind of reshuffling the deck for the F-15s back then. And so he came to us just for some experience. And, He, like I said, he grasped it. I think him and his wife really loved living in Yuma for some reason. I don't know why, but he was an outdoorsman type guy, and he loved living there. And Weezer really took everything on. He was the most junior guy in the squadron, one of the more talented pilots, like I said, and he embraced his position and he took on all the junior jobs. He was like the coffee mess officer, the guy that gets the mugs made. Yeah, the snacko. There you go. He was the snacko in our squadron for quite a while. And then he kind of moved up, was like the assistant operations officer. In fact, we sent him to the Top Gun's Adversary course, which Top Gun hosts. They have a couple, I don't know how many they do a year, but they have a course just for adversary pilots. Right. That's not the normal Top Gun, but it's a Top Gun. You see some of those guys have the Top Gun patch, but it says adversary under it. And they have a professional course for those guys. And so we sent our Air Force guy to it, and I think that was a good experience for him, Obviously helped him out. He had a good career going forward after that.
Brilliant stuff. So let's talk about the F-5. What was it like to fly, and how did it handle its strengths and weaknesses?
Well, the F-5, everybody can identify one. Looks like a flying dart. It's a beefed up T-38 type aircraft.
Oh, yeah.
It has bigger engines than a T-38, obviously bigger landing gear. Ours had leading edge extensions on them. They were the old Swiss F-5s that we took on and kind of made them a little bit better. They handled pretty well, and surprisingly, like I talked about earlier, all fighter jets go pretty fast, right? You can go straight and level or get in a dive and go fast, and that's what people like to see and hear about. But the reality of it is, if you're going to fight an airplane, it's all about its slow speed handling characteristics, because if you're going to get into a what we would just say cliched, a dogfight, a 1v1, everything's going to end up getting into slow speed at some point. You're going to bleed all the energy off the aircraft. The F-5 with its little wings was surprisingly pretty good slow, up into a point, if you knew what you were doing. You couldn't really put a lot of stick into it. You get to the point where you're basically using the rudders, and you're kind of kid gloving the airplane a little bit. You got to handle it kindly, because it's very unforgiving. Once you do depart it, it's going to lose a lot of altitude really, really fast, fast. And so you got to be careful with that part of it. But it flies well, handles very, very smooth handling airplane. There's some bad parts of it that there's nothing you could do about it, but the approach speed on the aircraft, not a big deal flying around Yuma when the weather's always good. Approach speed, was 160, 170 knots, which not that big of a deal. But when you're flying IFR and you're doing a PAR, precision approach radar approach in it, and the weather's bad, you're shooting approach close to mins, and you're going with that kind of speed, it's, it can be a little unnerving, because the timeline increases for the guy controlling you, and then you don't have a lot of time to correct for errors you're making in approach. So it was never really dangerous, but it was always something that, it was an airplane that you had to set up straight, and pay attention to what you were doing, especially in times like that.
And did you used to fly clean, or was there, I'm guessing there was a center line tank, or did you fly just completely clean, maybe sidewinds on the wings?
We always carried a Catum 9, a captive sidewinder on one wing usually, and a tax pod on the other. But other than that, we flew it slick. The Navy flew their F-5s with a single centerline tank. In the Marine Corps, we chose not to use a centerline tank. So ours, we flew them slick, which made them more of a rocket ship. Generally, we fly about a 0.8, sortie, maybe an hour max. So they're really quick sorties. But the range that we usually spent probably 75% of our time with started at 10,000 feet above the airfield. So we'd take off and just climb straight up into the range, and we'd be ready to go. And then the F-18s, we fought a lot from Miramar, they'd have to fly, it's crow flies 160 miles to get out to the range, but that was no problem for them. They would call us on the radio, and this is how quick it was to get an F-5 up and running. We'd be sitting around the ready room, briefed up, ready to go. The F-18s would take off out of Miramar. They would call us on our base radio in the ready room and say, hey, they're airborne. Either that or their ODO would call and say, hey, they just took off. And then we'd walk, get in the airplanes, take off.
Wow.
and then be out in our spot about the time they showed up in the range. It was that easy to get going and that quick, you know. And I got to say, a lot had to do with the maintenance. The maintainers that we had at 401 were top notch. You know, they had everything down. They were all civilians. The maintainers were not military guys. They were also, yeah, they're government contractors who have been working on that airplane their whole life, pretty much. They knew everything about it, every problem. They had it ready, and it was top notch. They were all former military guys. Most of them were retirees, but they had that airplane down. You know,
awesome stuff. And before we get into some juicy stuff, DACT, obviously against certain aircraft, what was it like being a commander on an F-5 Aggressor Squadron? Was there a lot of pressure there for you, Nugs?
You know, if there was, it was all self-induced. I never felt pressure from my boss or anything or higher up. You know, we had our mission and we knew what we needed to do. It was nothing new. You know, the squadron had been there for quite some time. They originally had been flying Kafirs and then switched to F-5s. And over time, you know, our mission was set in stone. Our job was set in stone. So, yeah, I never felt any pressure from above. The only pressure I felt internally, and that was, you know, I wanted to be, when you're a commanding officer, I wanted to be, you know, I wanted to fly with the boys, right? I wanted to hang out in the ready room and tell jokes, you know, and try to be the funniest guy in there and, you know, hang out and be one of the boys, but you really can't. So that was a big learning lesson for me. You have to step back. Right. You can't do that anymore. And my office was right next to the ready room. I would be sitting in my office and I could hear all the guys talking in the ready room saying funny things, and I'd want to add to it, you know, and come out of my office but I couldn't do that. I just have to accept it. But all the pressure was internal. I just wanted, at the end of the day, I took ownership of the squadron, and I wanted to make sure that, number one, we did everything safe, didn't hurt anybody, and that we thrived as a squadron, did what the Marine Corps needed us to do, training-wise, and that I generally wanted everybody that worked for me to do well and to move on in their career paths after that. You know, I wanted everything to be done to help them out. I wanted it to be a good experience for everybody there. And that was my kind of mindset. But it wasn't that when I first got there. It took me a couple of months to develop that mindset of the squadron and make that happen.
And obviously, it's a great post and stuff like where you were. But did you ever feel, you know, in the ready room or the officers' mess, where you came in, it was like, oh, Dad's here, if that makes sense? It's like, oh, we have to be careful. Did you ever feel like that?
You know, I think, you know, that's a question you probably have to ask somebody who worked for me. Right. Because in my mind, I didn't feel that way. You know, I think initially when I first got there, there were only maybe a handful of the pilots that were there that I knew from the past and knew of me. So they only knew me by reputation, right? They didn't know anything really about Nugs personally. Maybe one or two guys that were there that I had served with. They were very junior officers that I deployed with on a carrier deployment in VMFA 323. I had a couple of those young guys that were there. So, you know, I wasn't aware if they were, but I think that generally I created an atmosphere where they certainly felt comfortable talking to me about anything they had to do, and they certainly understood where I wanted the squadron to go. And everybody had a left or right lateral limit, you know, and they had to stay in between that, and never had a problem with anybody going outside of that. You know, it was a pure joy. In fact, I still keep in touch with most of the guys in that squadron now. The awesome. Department heads that work for me, we're on a perpetual text chain where we, you know, chit chat quite a bit and stuff like that. So, you know, but I can't answer how they felt. You know, you'd have to ask them. That's funny. That's a good question, though.
Yeah, because I can imagine, like, if I saw you coming in with, I'll be like, come over, you know, because I'll buy you a pint.
Yeah. No, we had good times together, and I think they knew. You know, when we would socialize, we go on detachments a lot. We'd always hang out together and go to dinner together and have a few beers. And, you know, I think that they all understood where I came from and what I was about, and, you know, felt good hanging out with me and stuff. Yeah, I wanted that to happen, and I created an atmosphere as such. So.
Awesome stuff. So let's get into some DACT. How did the F-5 fare against, you know, you mentioned the Hornet there. I don't know if you went up against the F-15, F-16, anything like that.
I flew when I was flying the F-5, some of the aircraft. I went against F-18s pretty much every day. Harriers, at times as well. Being out of Yuma was a Harrier base, and the Harriers were carrying radar and radar
Yeah.
missile then. So we did stuff with them. On detachment, we did a detachment with the OCU for the F-22
Oh,
and
wow.
supported them. Yeah, supported them one time. So there was not one airplane that should lose to an F-5 that America flies. Maybe a Harrier, you get in a DACT with a Harrier, yeah, but that's not what it's made for, right?
Hmm.
It's just kind of a bonus to be able to shoot. But an F-18, certainly the F-22, we fly F-16s from Luke Air Force Base here in Arizona, wasn't far away. And sometimes if we had extra sorties, they would call and ask for some support. We would give them some support. But yeah, we would generally lose if everything was going well. If they kept the radar lock on us and understood how to essay where we were, we would come to the merge. And if it was BVR, obviously they would shoot us before we got to the merge. But if they saw us come to the merge and started maneuvering with us, then they should beat us.
Yeah.
But you'd be surprised how many times that doesn't go well for them. And it's generally when they lose sight. They lose sight of you in F-5, and it's pretty much over for you, because the F-5 is a very small airplane, and it has small lines and edges. So when you're sideways to it or nose on looking at it, it's hard to even see. And we have some very exotic paint schemes you've probably seen before.
Oh, yeah, they're lovely, aren't they?
Yeah, and the bluish colored ones were impossible to see in the air, if you're looking into a blue sky. So if you lost radar lock on it and we got to the merge with you, then we would generally beat you. Fighting students from the RAG, we would win a lot doing DACT, because they would get slow with you and they would underestimate the ability for you to fly slow, and they would make mistakes and you would capitalize on them. But we every time we went flying, we wanted to win. Everybody has a personality where you don't want to lose.
Of course.
But we were happy for you that you did the right thing. You know what I mean? We saw mistakes happen all the time, and we would see them before they even happened. And we would generally be happy for you when you'd win. And if we beat you, we'd kind of laugh and cringe for you a little bit, because we've all been there. When I was a student, or even in the fleet, I'd fight the F-5s, and there were times I lost to them, and I remember feeling the professional embarrassment, and you do the phone debrief with them, and you expect them to rip you a little bit. No, but they don't. They understand. They tell you why and what they saw, and then that's the way it goes. So.
Did you ever fly against the U.S. Navy F-16s?
No, I didn't. The ones up at NSOC or the Strike up in Fallon, never flew against them. Right. I think that they were limited. From what I understand, that was a big asset for them to have, those F-16s. Yeah. So they didn't really have a lot of excess sortie time to do things like that, But on a different note, there were a couple of exercises where I actually flew alongside them. One time we went up to Tonopah, the base north of Nellis Air Force Base, where they used to do the F-117 stuff back in the days, the former secret type base. And we did a little daily detachment out of there for a week, supporting a red flag exercise. And we had the Navy F-16s out of Fallon with us, and we all were in a big package group together. So we would work along beside him. Yeah.
Awesome stuff. And with the F-5, did you feel like it was underpowered, or because I know it had reheat or afterburner, but was it powered enough for what it was designed for?
Yeah, I think so. It was certainly didn't have the thrust to weight like the F-18 is going to have, or even a Tornado. But it was fine. I mean, you like the burners on them. It goes pretty good, but it bleeds energy really fast. And I don't know, you could put a big enough engine in it to overcome that, because the wings are so small on it, and so that's why it's bleeding. It doesn't have a lot of grip on the air out there. And when it does, it's just kind of energy's going off, doing everything it can to turn the airplane. So, yeah, it would be underpowered, but it was fine. You accept that. You're going to fly a F-5, a vintage-type airplane. It's just the way it's going to be. But, yeah, you do miss that thrust to weight for sure.
Absolutely. And we might have talked about this off camera when me and Nugs originally met, but what was it like coming from the F3 onto an F5 squadron, commanding it? Were people interested about the jet, or were they just like, yeah, whatever, you've flown that?
No, they were absolutely, they were interested. Anybody that it's like I said before, it's a little bit of a novelty to have flown with the Royal Air Force, and everybody wanted to know about the airplane. Surprisingly, you're probably not going to like it like this, but a lot of Americans didn't even know what an F3 was. They know what a tornado is.
Yeah, the tornado.
Yeah, I flew the Tornado. Oh, well, all you guys did was bomb and low levels. I'm like, no, I didn't even fly that one. It was all air to air. And it was, I did a lot of low level, but it wasn't like the GR4, made for stuff like that. That wasn't our mission. Yeah. And they were fascinated by that, and they'd like to hear stories about it. Everybody asks the same questions we talk about, like, how was the training there? What do they do, and what are they like? And what's it like in the squadron every day? Or what are the people like? What are the pilots like? How do they treat you? And stuff like that. They'd love to hear stuff about that. But, in my F5 squadron, I had two of my pilots. One had been an exchange tour with our Air Force flying F-16s. And I had another Marine under my command, one of my department head, who flew the F-15 with the Air Force. So, they're sprinkled around in there. But I was the only guy that did the foreign exchange, flying something different like that, And, talking about the F3, I talked about my maintenance in the F5, being all civilian and former or retiree guys that had been doing this maintenance forever. I never mentioned before about the maintenance of the F3. We talked about the flying characteristics and stuff like that. But I was very pleasantly surprised when I went to fly the F3 that the maintenance department in the Royal Air Force, at least in a Tornado F3 squadron, was set up almost identical to the way we did it in the Marine Corps. You had somebody managing the whole operation, and a guy by the name of Jim Press, who's an awesome guy. I actually learned a lot from him. He and I bonded really well, and we would talk a lot of stuff, everything from history to maintaining airplanes to all kinds of stuff like that. And I always found the maintainers in the Royal Air Force as highly motivated young people. I mean, they really took pride in what they did and were very good at it. You go out there every day and they'd be smiling. They seemed very happy doing their job. And it played off because, as you understand, the F3's a maintenance intensive airplane. Anytime you have a jet with two engines, massive hydraulic system that's moving the wings, stuff like that, the avionics package, there's a lot to go wrong with that airplane. And they kept it top notch. We would have normal aches, pains and aches that you would normally have in any kind of fighter squadron, no different than what we had flying the F-18 in America. But they handled it well, and I thought the maintenance was excellent. Jim, man, he ran a tight ship there. He was really good at what he did, and I really enjoyed it. In fact, I keep up with Jim a little bit every now and then. He's here in America on an exchange tour. Yeah, and I'm real happy for him. He's doing well. But anyway, going back to that, the maintenance on the F5 was kind of the same thing. You had guys that were highly motivated, very good at what they did. We even had our own, what would be a good word to use? It wasn't an airframe shop, but we would basically build parts for the F5 in our squadron.
Wow.
They would sheet metal fabricating, things like that. I mean, they could build like minor things for the aircraft that they were allowed to build and we painted the airplanes ourselves. That's why they look good. We had paint shops that updated that stuff, and it was very cool to see.
Awesome stuff. So while we wrap up the F5 bit of this interview, how would you describe the F5, and did you enjoy your time on the jet?
Absolutely enjoyed my time on the jet. I would say I have to take a step back here, because the reason I enjoyed my time flying the jet mainly was because I was a commanding officer, and it was an honor and a privilege to fly with the people that I flew with. And I had a top-notch group of guys working for me. Purely flying the airplane, I thought it was awesome, especially straight and level. And if I just had to make a 180-degree turn, it was really cool, and it was really cool to see the mission that we did. You really got to believe in it, because you're basically, for a lot of people, it's the first time they've seen or fought against any other aircraft other than another F-18. You go out and do a 2v2 with another F-18. It's not the same as showing up to the merge with a completely different airplane. And so students would come from over from Miramar and see the F-5 for the first time. I mean, you know, they're a little bit nervous because, number one, it's a different airplane. Number two, they don't want to lose because they're embarrassed or they may fail the sortie. And number three, I think that the pilots in 401 had a reputation of being very good pilots, but they saw us as old grumpy guys, I think, in some ways, you know. And I tried to break that habit when we went there. You know, I tried to, you know, impart upon the pilots, hey, don't be angry in a debrief. Don't chastise anybody. You know, you're here to lose, and we're paid professional losers. You know, we were paid to go there and lose, and if we lost, then America was in a better spot. If we went out there and won every time, then we're in bad shape as a force, right? You got to think about it that way. So we never tried to lose, but sometimes we would induce mistakes to help them out. You know, if we saw people struggling, we would do something to make it even the score for them, maybe make a turn the wrong way, or, you know, in a DACT or doing a 1v1, maybe make a bad decision and turn the, you know, 2 circle when we should go 1 circle, things like that, to help them out, to see if they would capitalize on it. But overall, man, it was a great airplane to fly. I had a lot of fun in it. I flew, I didn't get as many hours as I would want because we flew such short sorties, but I flew a lot of sorties. Does that make sense? You know, flying a couple of 0.8s a day, you know, 4 or 5 days a week. The time doesn't add up like normal jets do, but I had a great time flying. Feel really comfortable with it.